Hello everyone, this right here is part 2 of the Random Dice Defense Battlefield tier list. If you haven't watched part 1 already, be sure to check it out before watching this video. Link will be in the description below and in the top right corner. We are raiding all the different battlefields in Random Dice Defense for both co-op and PvP at the same time, which really ended up being extremely difficult. But to help me in this difficult task, I brought my friend Tags. If you haven't already, be sure to check out Tags' channel. Link to Tags' channel will be in the description below. But anyways, let's pick up right where we left off. And then we have Lava Board, one of my personal favorites as well, because of one single deck that I keep running all the time. But it's, in my opinion, a good board, but really the only thing that I see it used for, and the only thing I use it for too, is storm decks with the trait specifically, since it deals a lot of extra damage due to the damage being dealt all around the board, since there's lava on it. But
you said storm decks with the trait, you mean lightning?
Oh, I literally said that in my last video that I always call fine. Lightning Cloud for storm. Okay, replay that clip. Anyways, next up we have a Lightning Cloud dice, which is the dice that I always end up mixing up with storm dice for some really strange reason. But yeah, there we go. Lightning Cloud. Thank you for correcting me. I would not have noticed even. Lightning Cloud, the only deck that I ever play with this board. Besides that specific deck, I think this board is quite awful. It isn't really used. I don't see a use for it in AI. Definitely not in co-op, personally. And for PvP, I think it works for Lightning Cloud, but I don't know any other deck that actually uses it properly.
I think it's a D tier because it's only good for one type of deck, and that's Lightning Cloud Flow, and that's it. You can't really run it in co-op, and there's really no other dice to really run on that board besides the Lightning Cloud, because that's the only way to get the full effect of the Lightning Cloud trait. So I think it's very, I guess you could say, limited in a way, where it's only good for like one thing. So that's why I'm going to give it a D tier, and because you're not going to run this board in co-op, really.
Yeah, definitely. Then,
all right, you know what this one's called? No, I'm just kidding.
I actually had to think for a moment. But this is Magic Breaker. Very old. A board that I used to use so much back when Recharge was kind of meta. And I mean, this actually is still used in both PvP and in co-op. I don't see it often in PvP at all, but it obviously gives you an extra board slot if you manage to get the proper setup with it, depending on what you're on, I guess. When I used to play with this board, it was always setting up the landmine setups, but landmine doesn't work anymore, so if that is put in consideration, then I honestly don't know where to put it. I would have put it at a B tier, maybe high B tier, previously at least, when landmine was there, because it is obviously, it can be really nice to have in PvP. I would probably put it on a B tier.
Okay, so in my opinion, and this is my opinion only, but when it comes to co-op, I think the Magic Breaker is probably the second best battlefield for co-op. I would say definitely for co-op it's S tier, because you can get some good setups with it. Now, before the landmine got nerfed in a way because of the way they switched co-op, you were able to do like a 5 landmine setup on the breaker board. And I actually did this with somebody at the time. I did it with somebody, and we got to like wave 2100 with it, with the old co-op system, of course. And then it worked out really well. And this was like Soul Moon, Holy Sword, landmine, I think, or something like that. Yeah, we took out Snowball and put in the landmine. And because it's great, because you can get rid of dice that you don't want to get the position that you need, and then you end up going a lot further, because you can do like those setups where you got the scope with like the Soul Moon and the scope, etc. But in terms of PvP, I think it's just average, so I might have to give it a B tier, maybe C tier overall, but it's definitely really good in co-op, so maybe I guess a B tier.
Yeah,
on average.
Yeah, I would say maybe low B tier or something like that, probably. Pantheon, I've probably only seen used with Rage, when Rage was really strong, but that never seemed to be that super effective, honestly. But I don't remember if that was before the board got buffed or not. But generally, I feel like this board isn't really used much at all, and I definitely see why, to be honest. I would not give this board a very high rating. I would lean towards either a C or D tier, because it certainly is not used in co-op, and it's not really used in PvP either.
So in terms of Pantheon, I think you were saying earlier about how players were running like the Rage Bubble deck at the time on the Pantheon board, instead of like, say, the Plasma Shield board. I always thought that was like the reckless variation of that, because you had no protection.
Yeah.
You were just relying on the crit, and it was just like it was like you were just living life on the edge at that point. But but in terms of the Pantheon, though, I'm gonna give it a D tier. And I'm guessing before I began to play this game, I'm pretty sure it was used a whole lot more. It was one of the boards that everyone ran, because I'm guessing Yin Yang was super good on it at the time, or like Roy Yang, things like that. But since there's other boards now, I just feel like this board is outclassed by a lot of other things that are just better than it, like scope and the plasma shield, etc. So I'm gonna give it a D tier overall.
Next up, we have Plasma Shield. Now, this is very much an RNG board. People with good RNG uses this a lot. I mean, to be fair, people that don't have good RNG uses it too, but for someone with good RNG, this board is gonna be your best friend, probably. And it works with a lot of decks. I mean, it works with, I almost feel like whatever you wanna make it work with. Now, that isn't entirely true, but there are a lot of decks that uses this. I know of Devil Sword. I have seen Phantom Thief players use this as well. And then obviously there's Rage, even though Rage isn't that very played anymore. I don't really know how it would be used effectively in co-op, but in PvP it is a really good board, so I don't really know where to put this, to be honest, but I would put it at a slightly higher tier. Maybe not A tier, but it would feel a little bit weak putting it on a C tier. But
I'm gonna go with B tier, only because you're not gonna run it in co-op. It is a solid board. Right now it's not really used as much as it was in the past. More so, you're seeing a lot more of Ancient Summoner or Scope board usually. So it is a solid board for certain decks, but I just think that it's better. I just think that there's better options out there right now. The board itself, you don't run co-op decks with it, and plus, there's nothing more frustrating when you're running a PvP deck with growth on the plasma shield and you want Knight to flip you and it blocks it.
Yeah.
Especially when you play Devil Sword. I'm sure, like, anyone that's played Devil Sword Ignition on this board, and when it's like Knight Boss and you want Knight to flip you and it just blocks 2 times in a row, that's like one of the worst things ever. That's where it's like your board is too good at that point, you know?
Yeah.
So like, I hate that, man. I still think it's just a B tier though at this point, because you don't really see it as often now.
Yeah, I agree, honestly. Next up we have a Prism board, and I feel like this is I mostly see this used with aggro dices, which, I mean, that makes complete sense, because I don't really know how else you would use it if you weren't using it with aggro. Or I mean, in co-op it would be with for the support player, but it sort of ruins it for the damage on the DPS side, and it would probably only really be for a fast setup, if that is what you want to do, pretty much. But this was very used with Phantom Thief trait until it got nerfed. Now I don't really know, honestly. I'm very unsure. I think it's a very good board, but it lacks use, I feel like. I do want to put it on a B tier, but I would probably say a C tier for me, or a low B tier.
I would say C tier probably. Actually, no, I'll put it at B tier, because this board, honestly, I think it's a fun board to use. It's similar to the Pantheon board in a way where there's decks that you can run on this board instead of the plasma shield board, whereas you make the sacrifice of, okay, I'm going to have a lot more offense, but my defense is going to lack now, because I'm basically going in reckless with no protection again, because instead of the plasma shield as a safeguard, you're basically going to get hit by everything, whether it's abilities and bosses. So it's the trade-off that you got to be willing to make, but I think it's a fun board, and it could make for some nasty decks, such as, I know, yeah, with the Phantom Thief trait, it was, oh my god, that was so nasty. It used to be a board used in co-op, so I would say, yeah, somewhere between B and C, but I think B's fine.
Yeah, personally, I would say, once again, C, or probably a high C tier or low B tier, but I'm totally fine putting on a B tier, even though I would say it's a quite low B. Then we have Quantum. Now, this is a board that I like to use if I play co-op, and I mean, ever since it got released, I feel like it's mainly been a board for co-op, even though I have seen it used with a few different decks in PvP, such as, for example, example, I saw it was used with gun dice when that was in the meta, but gun doesn't really work anymore, and I don't really know what to use this with other than variants of Phantom Thief without using traits and solar and such. It's not a bad board, but I don't see that many potential uses for it. I am ready to put it on either a B tier or a C tier, honestly, because it still works great for a pretty fast and efficient setup in co-op. So either a B or C tier for me. Yeah.
I guess not to say I'm biased, but I'd hate to put it above the 5th Voyage board, but the issue is that obviously the 5th Voyage you don't really use in co-op. As for the Quantum board, I guess we'll say it's a B tier, because number one, I think the Quantum is the 3rd best board to use in co-op. It's probably the most consistent and the easiest to set up. As of right now, when it comes to co-op, there's 2 better choices in my opinion, the Void and the Magic Breaker board. So I'm leaning more towards a C tier, but I'll leave it at B for now, just because of how good it could be in co-op.
And then we have 2 really good boards left, but let's start with Scope board. Scope board, really good board in PvP. I would say it works with, I don't even know how many decks, a lot of different decks. Especially if you use Bubble or Time Winder with it, it works extra well, mainly because you can obviously make it even a lot further. But I don't see it used in co-op at all, and I don't really know what you would do with it in co-op. But it does work for other game modes besides co-op and PvP. I would either put it, honestly, either a B or an A tier.
I'm gonna say B tier, yeah. Even though it got nerfed in the past from 30% to 20% for the scope chance, it's still a really good board in my opinion. It's probably, I would say, the best board in PvP, and they should definitely release a Battlefield skin for it. I think it's long overdue.
Hell yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's a lot of decks that work with it, especially like with Forged Soul. You could even run Sealing decks with it, which are a lot of fun. Also for card mine, Scope is also a great choice to use, especially like if there's like a Berserk Slime. Scope board comes in clutch for that. So I think it's a very good board in my opinion.
And then we have one last board left, which is Void. Now, as you've mentioned already, Void is really good for co-op specifically, and maybe there are decks that uses it in PvP too, but I genuinely don't know. I'm a bit unsure as to the rating. It would be fair to put it somewhere on B, I think, but because of PvP, I could see it be placed on a high C tier. I do use the board a lot on AI mode, so I do think a B tier would be fair.
I kind of want to say D tier, to be honest with you. Maybe C tier, only because of, in my opinion, I think Void is the absolute best board for co-op. Now, when it comes to PvP, the only decks that I think could really benefit from it are if you run like a Monolith deck. I was messing around with that in the past, but it's not really solid. So I guess overall, I'm going to say C tier, only because of how good it is in co-op.
So for the final rating decisions that we've made now after putting all of these, we have decided to move Blessings down to B tier for adjustment. We've also decided to actually move Scope up to an A tier instead of the Blessings board. And we have also decided to, unfortunately, move Magic Breaker down to a C tier. We have also decided to move Dice of Destiny down to a D tier. And that right there was the Battlefield tier list. And so, as I've already said several times now, most of the ratings in this video honestly ended up being a little bit scuffed. And again, this is simply just because it was really difficult to make a tier list on both co-op and PvP at the same time, since both game modes are extremely different in terms of playstyle and simply what works and what doesn't work. We either way decided to do one tier list for co-op and one tier list for PvP as well, with only the battlefields. Now here are the pictures of the tier lists that we made off camera. Unfortunately, we cannot share any motivation for why we made the decisions we made, but maybe that's a video for the future. Either way, that was all for today's video. Be sure to check out Tags if you haven't already. I've said that so many times, but honestly, Tags puts a lot of effort into his videos and he uploads quite a lot more consistently than I do, so link to his channel will be in the description below and in the end screen. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I really hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and later.